It's on. It's on. I was just checking to make sure the mic is on.
This is for the speakers.
Okay. There. I'm released now.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to the celebration of the life of Ken Guza. Thank you so much for gathering together to celebrate and remember Ken. I'm the Reverend Mary Geer, minister for the Olympia Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm joined today by Troy Fisher, OUUC's music director, and we give thanks for Kate McHugh and Fritz Reedy on the tech table and the many, many hands that helped create this sacred space today. We are streaming and recording the service, and we are grateful for the gift of your presence in whatever way you have chosen to arrive here today. It matters that you are here. May this be a time and a place for each one of us to experience the spirit of love and healing. We gather today to grieve the loss of Ken Guza, husband, father, friend, environmentalist, traveler, hiker, and lover of the natural world. It is natural to feel sorrow and sadness when we lose someone we love. Today, let's make time to acknowledge our feelings of sadness together. Every one of us here is acquainted with the grief that loss brings. And so we feel compassion for each other as we are united in our humanity. Together we face the joy and the pain of being human. So today, while we grieve that Ken has died, we also honor that he lived, and oh, how he lived. Today, we especially hold in love Ken's family, near and far. For those on site today, Diana has placed cards in the Commons where you can write stories about Ken and his impact on your life. For those joining us online today, we'll invite you to share later in the Zoom chat. It is the practice of this congregation to light a chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. May the cup be a symbol of our community of love, and the flame, the symbol of life that is in each one of us and that lives on. We light our chalice with words that Ken chose from Amy Florin. We forever carry the burning ember of those we love within us. They are gone from our sight, but not from our hearts. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Ken left some requests and some writings for this day. He lived with illness for a long time and made an intentional decision to live his life to the fullest. This is what Ken wrote about his early life and family. Ken lived an active and fulfilling life, an intentional life of purpose. He is survived by his wife, Diana Larson Mills, son, Peyton Guza, daughter-in-law, Therese, grandsons, Ashton and Preston, daughter, Michelle Thompson, and son-in-law, Ben Robertson. Of his son, Peyton, and daughter, Michelle, Ken was proud of the wonderful lives they made for themselves and the families that they created. Diana was central to Ken's life. He referred to her as the spouse of my heart. As a second marriage, he realized a perfect partner and shared values, passion, a love of nature, and a commitment to living well and ethically. Diana challenged Ken to be his better self. He was in awe of experiencing a perfect partnership. Ken said, a successful marriage was the accomplishment of which he was most proud. Ken's son, Peyton, wrote a remembrance for his dad. These are Peyton's words. Papa Ken's celebration of life, from Ken Guza. Today I'm trying not to be sad about the loss of my dad, but instead I want to honor how he not only enriched my life, but touched the hearts of everyone he met. I've instilled in my boys the same love for the outdoors that he passed on to me, proving that sometimes the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It just rolls downhill on a pair of skis. I'm here today on crutches, kind of in the theme of my dad's adventures. Let's just say my adventure spirit and execution didn't quite align. But hey, the helicopter medevac ride was a memorable bonus, right? My earliest skiing memories are being sandwiched between my dad's knees as we came down the slopes at White Pass. This tradition continued until I traded my skis for a snowboard at 15. 43 years later, I just spent a week this February snowboarding in Sapporo, Japan with a friend. My dad and I shared countless hours skiing, biking, hiking, and canoeing. Not to forget the legendary games of cribbage. Oh, and the time I was double skunked in Catalina, which was frequently referenced, and his men's hiking group, which I fondly referred to as the ice cream connoisseurs with a hiking problem. There was always a local ice cream shop no matter where the trail led. I hope to find such a fun-loving crew in my own life. Our travels took us from the slopes of Arapahoe Basin and Sun Valley to the islands of Denmark and the beaches of St. Thomas. Every location added chapters to our book of family memories, especially those trips with my dad and Diana and the whole family. One memorable night in the Great Basin, we ventured out for a bike ride on a dry lake bed using only our Forerunner's dome light as a beacon to guide us back. Riding in the dark, we raced against the battery clock, a perfect blend of thrill and adventure. Or that time in Bend, Oregon, after a day on Mount Bachelor when my dad, full of enthusiasm, strapped our bikes to the Forerunner roof, only to discover a low-hanging hotel overpass just a few yards away. It turns out the adventure doesn't always wait for the mountain. Sometimes it happens right in the parking lot. Through these stories, my dad's spirit of adventure and his knack for turning every situation into a cherished memory live on. Diana, you were a crucial part of those memories too, a perfect co-pilot for his life's journey. From my dad, I learned to value what matters, protect what's dear, and express myself fully. Thank you all for being here today or tuning in from afar. Your friendship enriched my dad's life immensely. He lived exactly as he wished, and by being his friend, you shared in his most cherished values. And Diana, thank you for being by his side, making an unstoppable team. We look forward to many more adventures with you, whether in Japan, Palm Springs, or anywhere else the map takes us. Ken's writing continues as he reflects on his professional life, which started in the U.S. Air Force, where he worked in a psychiatric clinic. There he had a mentor, Jerome Miller, who he later worked with in Massachusetts, Illinois, and Pennsylvania, resulting in major innovations in the care of children in foster care and juvenile justice systems. He continued this work in Washington State. His work values were steadfast, even when sometimes at cross purposes with the prevailing authority. He worked for the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services for over 25 years. During his work in the Division of Children's Services, he was a program manager for the treatment, foster care, and group care programs. While at the Division of Drug and Alcohol Services, he oversaw the development and maintenance of the Oxford House program, which provided safe and sober housing for people coming back to the community from treatment. Would Charles like to come forward to speak?
Thank you. I'm Charles Chelan, and many of you today knew Ken as an outdoor enthusiast, environmentalist, founder of the Estuarium, which I see as a little note in our programs to make a contribution in his honor to, a Kiwanis member, and a fellow wood splitter. Now, we split wood every Saturday morning, and I was there this morning, and of course we talked about Ken and his not being able to be there, of course, and how strong and resourceful he always was. But I knew him also in another domain, and that was as a social justice worker in the child welfare field. I knew him in that area because I worked with Ken for most of my career. I was a lot younger than Ken, of course. But I worked with him for most of my career as the CEO, Executive Director of Community Youth Services in Olympia. You spoke about his early time with Jerome Miller. I was going to mention that. Jerry Miller was famous throughout the country. I remember about 20 years ago, he was featured on 60 Minutes because he was doing iconoclastic things like shutting down juvenile, I wouldn't say juvenile justice programs. He was shutting down detention centers and incarceration centers for youth in Massachusetts. He shut them all down, and he replaced them with small community-based programs because he knew that large was not better, smaller was better, and wrapping the families and the children with a lot of services was much more effective. Well, he brought that to, as he went with Jerry to Illinois, Massachusetts, and then he came to Olympia on his own, and that's where he worked for DSHS, Social and Health Services, when I was at Community Youth Services. He encouraged me to create a small treatment center for kids in crisis called Haven House, which is a crisis residential center. Now, that was 1984, and that program has served over 10,000 children, more than that actually, since its founding. So we can, attribute his touch to that. In the early years, my agency, Community Services, was a small fledgling nonprofit organization. And we had a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, but Ken really provided the rudder for us because he said, you need to take, what I've done over the years and apply that, and that is not putting together large congregate care programs for kids, but put in small treatment-oriented therapeutic programs. And as soon as I finished Haven House, he was on my back to create the treatment foster care program. And I said, Ken, we're going to have to wait a year or two because I've got to digest it. We know nothing what we're doing right now. Let's just have a little time. So we did, and we put that program together. It was incredibly successful. It still operates today. The outcomes that the programs that he had us implement had a very positive impact on the kids and families that we dealt with. As I got to know Ken also, I got to know him outside of work. And I learned that he was a skier, outdoorsman. Now, was that a ski accident, Peyton? Oh, okay, it wasn't skiing. At Sapporo. Well, I saw him ski. I skied with him several times at White Pass and saw him at Mount Tahoma trails. Anybody see him backcountry, cross-country skiing? Well, the guy was like poetry in motion. He just traversed. He was so smooth and so fluid. And I was so jealous of his technique as I plodded through the snow. He was also a ski patrol, on the ski patrol there. His form was always classic, but one thing that wasn't classic, well, it was classic, but I'm not going to say classic in a good way, was his equipment. Now, Ken didn't embrace new equipment, right, Diana? No. So he had these old skis and boots, and I'm telling you, they were ancient. I would often say, Ken, those are really, as we were showing off our new equipment, it's like, what about some new equipment? No, these are just fine. And they were fine until you guys were at White Pass one day. And remember when he put those boots on? And what happened to them? They exploded. Because plastic absolutely does not last forever. Well, he got some new boots and new skis, and he didn't really like them because he liked the old. They were an anchor to his past. But he made do with them anyway. Ken also introduced me to the Tuesday hiking group. And I didn't have a lot of, he founded our hiking group, it must have been 22 years ago, with Warren Dawes and a few other people. And he invited me into it even though I was working, and I would be able to get away a couple of times a year for a hike. And I knew that when I retired, that's what I want to do on Tuesdays, is go with those hikes for those guys. Well, I'm really thankful that, one, he found the group, and two, he ordered me into it, because I made a whole new group of friends, and I've created a lot of new adventures. Up until that time, I'd never really hiked, nor had I ever overnight camped. So we took care of that. So I admired Ken in so many ways, as an adventurer, a skier, a hiker, a community builder, a social justice advocate, and warrior for children, youth, and families. It's impossible to know how many tens of thousands of children and families he impacted. Just think what he did through my agency. Easy total, 20,000. Now look at what he did in Illinois, Massachusetts, Washington. It's amazing, really, what he did, the legacy he left. Well, it's not impossible to know, though, how he helped steer me and Community Youth Services in so many positive directions, how he helped me leave a legacy, two, of service that has made a difference. And yes, Ken, it was a wonderful life, and thank you for sharing a part of it with me. Thank you.
Ken continued his reflection by writing about his spiritual life. Ken was not raised in a religious background. His only church service was a coercive one, which was during basic training. His spiritual values were prompted by his sister Phyllis, who supplied him with books as a child. As a lifelong reader with broad interests, he was intrigued by ideas, questions, and a hunger for understanding. Reading began a lifetime process of building a personal belief and value system with ideas from books as a framework. Over time, experiences, relationships, successful and unsuccessful, added layers. Travel added more, and outdoor life still more. A diverse range of relationships added another dimension. Ken participated in several sessions of this congregation's Building Your Own Theology, resulting in this credo: value love, live ethically every day, contribute positively, immerse in nature. And Ken's spirituality certainly included a love of nature. He wrote about himself. Central to Ken's life was a passion for nature and outdoor experiences. Over 7 decades, activities including skiing, riding horses, rock climbing, kayaking, and hiking. In later decades, the list expanded to outdoor and conservation work, trail building, salmon doseting, cross-country ski patrol, and collecting data on conservation properties, abandoned mines in Southeast California, bird counts, and invasive plants. Ken served on the governing boards of Washington State Parks Winter Recreation Committee. He also served on the Capitol Land Trust and the Puget Sound Estuarium, which he founded along with Diana. Ken co-founded a men's hiking group referred to as THEM. And as an aside, THEM is an acronym for Tuesday Hikes, Especially for Men, which Ken co-founded with other men from this congregation: Pete Holm, Bob Allison, Pete Taylor, and Warren Dawes. And despite the fact that Warren is the only surviving founder, the group continues strong. What a legacy. So Ken continues writing about himself. Ken also founded a men's book group called Old Farts Armchair Adventure Reading Group. They read about the outdoor adventures of others. His volunteer work touched many people. At times, friends were hesitant at his offer of an opportunity you might be interested in. He was always recruiting volunteers for the projects in which he believed. Sandy, would you like to come forward?
Well, hi, thank you. My name is Sandy Zeiner. I'm the Estuarium Board President and the Meet the Beach volunteer. Ken and Diana had a dream. They have a place in Olympia to inspire folks about the marine environment, an organization that is knowledgeable, friendly, outgoing, and passionate about the marine environment too. Ken and Diana gave us the Puget Sound Estuarium. Ken's vision was to have these wonderful people working together a staff to bring the dream alive, volunteers giving their time to help, donors that have reached into their pockets to help provide that space, that staff, and the programs that we do at the estuarium. Becoming a family that brings Ken's vision together. So the next time that you pull on your boots and head down to the beach, get on your belly and look underneath a pier. See that sparkle in a kid's eye when they touch a sea star for the very first time, to learn about newts and tides, to reach that donor goal that takes the estuarium into the future. Know that you are teaching Ken's love and passion of the marine environment, that you have become Ken's estuarium family. Thank you.
Mike, would you like to come up?
On Tuesday, April 9th, 2002, three guys, Ken Guza, Warren Dawes, and Pete Taylor, hiked around the Swally Delta. That was great. Let's do it again next Tuesday. A seed was planted. Later, that seed grew when Bob Allison, Pete Holm joined the Tuesday hikes. Early on, these guys had an idea, a wonderful, preposterous idea. Why don't we see if we could hike with the Tuesday Trotters? The Trotters were the long-standing women's hiking group. Legend has it the answer was not just no, it was hell no. Well, that didn't work. Guess we have to form our own group. We'll call our group Them. Tuesday hikes exclusively for men. Time had a mellowing effect, and the in-your-face exclusively for men got moderated to especially for men. Ken was one of our 5 founders. We have lost Pete Holm, Pete Taylor, Bob Allison, and now Ken. Warren, please stick with us. Ken reflected, if longevity and numbers validate a good idea, Them has flourished. With 22 years of hiking under our belts, we have now about 60 guys on the roster. And if you are a Them hiker, please raise your hand. When you look at pictures of them, you seldom see Ken. He always stood outside the frame of the picture. He avoided a starring role. He never called attention to himself. He preferred to be the catalyst, kind of the initiator. His satisfaction was in connecting people together, the creator of relationships from behind the scenes. Them used to do 2-nighters at the ski patrol hut at Copper Creek near Ashford. Normally we would hike during that middle day going snowshoeing. But one year the snowfall failed us, bare ground, and it was hot. Not to worry, Ken sold us on a hike to the nearby Forest Service tower. Nearby is the operative word in that sentence. No sweat. 3 or 4 miles, minimal elevation gain, Ken announced. So with Ken in the lead, we set out. After 3 or 4 miles, how much further? Ken's response, only another mile or so. Half hour later, are we getting any closer? Maybe another mile, Ken reassured us. We finally made it to the tower, and that day we coined a new term for the hiking lexicon, the Guza Mile. Yeah, look it up in your trail guide, it's in the small print. A Guza Mile equals 1.5 or so normal miles, okay? After hiking with them for a while, we can recognize each other from a distance by a guy's gait, distinctive gait. Ken had a pensive gait, head tilted, shoulders rolled slightly forward, moving smoothly, deliberately down the trail with his hands clasped behind his back. Hiking with Ken was a challenging delight. I could rely on him to ask probing questions. I could also rely on him to expect thoughtful answers. One of them guys observed, when you engage with Ken, expect to think hard. A few years back, Ken and other hikers realized the connections we had in them afforded us a precious opportunity, an opportunity to tackle the hardest question: what about death? So together we plunged in, exploring end-of-life questions. What do you want our final days to look like? What documents do we need to make that happen? Who do we want to know of our wishes? Tough questions, but we did not have to tackle them alone. For Ken, them was a big gift, a life gift. Yes, the exercise was good, but connecting with each other, that's what Ken considered really important. Diane told me he called it the joy of being together. For so many of us, them is a big life gift. Thanks, Ken, for creating them. Thanks for helping them flourish. Thanks for elevating our conversations on the trail. And thank you, Ken, for keeping us going, mile after Guza mile.
Ken lived his last years with a terminal illness. And the most important part of that sentence is that Ken lived. He left these thoughts about living with leukemia, all from the writings of Joseph Campbell. We must let go of the life we planned so as to accept the one that is waiting for us. Participate joyfully in the sorrows of life. When we quit thinking primarily about ourselves and our own self-preservation, we undergo a truly heroic transformation of consciousness. And last, Ken shared these thoughts about living, also from the American mythologist Joseph Campbell, who wrote of the term bliss. If you follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you, and the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living. Being outside, experiencing the natural world, was the life Ken wanted to live. In his writing, Ken included this quote from N. Scott Momaday. "If you would know the earth for what it really is, learn it through its sacred places. At Devil's Tower, or Canyon de Chelly, or Chacacoa Mounds, you touch the pulse of the living plant. You feel its breath upon you. You become one with a spirit that pervades geologic time and space." For Ken, nature and a perfectly carved turn in new snow met that definition of bliss. The video that we'll share of Ken skiing was taken by his son Peyton. Skiing was something Ken did for 61 years, and he was very proud of it. He seemed perfectly at home and relaxed on the slopes amid the beauty of nature. May our memories of Ken include this image of him in his bliss.
Hey, looking good.
There are many stories and memories of Ken here today. We make time to hear some of them now. For those who are joining us online, I invite you, if you wish, to share a quality or a brief memory of Ken. You can write that in the Zoom chat, and we'll be sure to share it with Ken's family. For those who are here on site, if you have a story that must be told today, I invite you to come forward to tell it now. and there will be more time for sharing after the service during a reception. I would invite you to please come up to the microphone so that everyone can hear you, including those who are online.
Hi, everybody. I'm Diana's sister, Theus, and Ken's sister-in-law. So we hiked with them many, many years, you can imagine. And as we walked along the trail, Ken would often disappear from the group. And I'd say to Diana, "Where's Ken?" As I look around the area, she always said, "Oh, don't worry. He will find us. He always does." So sure enough, pretty soon, there he is on top of a huge rock or boulder. And that's why we started calling Ken Goat Boy.
I'm Jennifer Line, and I was on ski patrol with Ken for 26 years. And I have to say, even though he said some serious things, he said some serious things that then got you really bad. And you were down the trail, and everyone was laughing at you. So just that's a part of him that I love dearly.
My name is Cindy, and I first met Ken when Peyton was about 5 years old because I worked with his mother my whole career. And we worked in the forest industry, and so there was always an intersection between Ken's activism and environmental protection in our work. And one day I was living up on the condos of San Francisco Hill, and I'm looking outdoors, I'm like, who's that? I'm like, open the door, it's Ken Guza. And I'm like, what are you doing up here? And he's bopping around and looking for who he was looking for. I think it was Kennedy, last name. And he said, I've got an opportunity you might be interested in. I said, Ken, come on. It's Capital Land Trust, of course. I said, I'm plenty busy. But I just remember that image of just vibrancy in life. And so that's my memory of Ken. Beautiful skiing. Thanks.
Hi, I met Ken in about 1987 or 8 in Seattle. And he worked for the state, and I worked for a crisis center. And I remember him coming in. There was a lot of folks that came in from the state, and you're usually pretty like, uh-oh, what are they going to find wrong? And I remember Ken, because he came in and he started asking the staff these curious questions like, what do you enjoy about the kids you work with? What have you learned from the kids you worked with? How enjoyable is your job because of these amazing kids you work with? And the staff were so kind of struck by these questions that they were like, wait a minute, is this the licensing guy or is this someone else? And to this day, I've had numerous similar meaningful conversations with Ken because of his great questions that made you think about your life and others' lives.
Hi, I'm Warren Dawes. When I think about Ken, I think back about that first hike that he and Pete Taylor and I did way back in 2002 when we decided it would be nice to go out for a hike, just to get out in the wild. It was a beautiful time of the year. It was April and the spring was coming on. And so the next day we went out to Nisqually. My wife had done a lot of work on protecting Nisqually, and so it was a special place for us to go. But we thoroughly enjoyed that hike, just walking around, seeing the wildlife, the birds. It was a special day. It was so special that we said, how about next Tuesday? Well, the tradition was started. them continues to this day. Our membership has grown. It has fluctuated. I haven't seen the latest report. I could ask the man at the end of the road there how many are on there now, but we're close to, about 80 members that like to go out on Tuesdays. We run maybe 3 or 4 different hikes of different complexities so that everyone has the chance to do the hike they would like to do, and we get out and thoroughly enjoy it. Other things that have happened, like when Bob Allison came back from Arizona and joined us in the summer of 2002, we acquired a real knowledgeable hiker in Bob. Bob had worked as a guide for the mountaineers, and so there wasn't any trail, I don't think, that he hadn't already hiked up. I had one thrilling day, though, once when we hiked up above Kennedy Creek up onto the hillside where we had a beautiful view up Totten Inlet. We called it Totten Overlook. And Bob Ellison came up to me and he said, I don't think I've ever been up here before. And I said, yes, that's a first. Anyway, Ken thoroughly enjoyed being out with us. He was probably our, if it was Tuesday, that's where you would find him, out with us, hiking along. We would hike all the different hikes. We had a collection of 250 hikes in western Washington that we've hiked through the years, extending all the way from the Canadian border down to the Oregon border, down to the wildlife refuge that way, out to the coast. It's been a wonderful experience for us, and we've gained life friendships through this whole process. So them, Tuesday hikes, especially for men, has become a very important part of a number of fellows who are here today for Tuesdays, and it certainly was for Ken, and we are only most appreciative for having had Ken for the years that we did. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Ken was my uncle, and I just wanted to share that as a kid, I would come here to Olympia most summers, and we always went on an adventure. It was always so fun, and just seeing all the new things, and he was just always so full of life. I always remember thinking that he was probably the most intelligent man I've ever met, and he just had a way about him, and he had so much knowledge and wisdom, and still to this day, I saw him a few months before he passed, and he was telling me one of his stories, and I would just look into his eyes and just be memorized, like how he's just so knowledgeable and intelligent, and he always, anything I would ask him, he always had the answer. He just knew so much, and it was mesmerizing. I just remember looking in his eyes and just being blown away at, him, and you would think that, I know he traveled all around the world, and of course he loved the outdoors, but just, he was special. He was special, and I'm really grateful that he got to live the life that he did. And my kids were saying that the best memories they have with him is he was always into puzzles and always had great stories. He did tell me he was proud of me, and I did things a little backwards in life. I had my kids young, and I'm barely going back to school. I'm actually trying to do something in social work as well. But I know that he was proud of me, and I think that he would be proud of that, and maybe I can follow in his footsteps. So, Yes, so thank you all for being here, and we would appreciate it.
My name's, excuse me, Tim Ransom, and I'm a member of this congregation and also of the Old Farts. I'm one of the Old Farts. Ken brought me into that book group some years ago, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But I got to know Ken and Diane. Well, I've known Diane since we joined the church 25 plus years ago. But I got to know Ken when talk of the need for some kind of what turned out to be the estuarium started. And Ken eventually brought me into that discussion, with me having a background in planning and environmental affairs. And I was eventually able to contribute that planning and a little bit of startup financial money to get it going. But the thing about it at the beginning was that I had no understanding of why Ken was interested in doing this. And I've learned a lot more about that today, about his passion for all things environmental, which now makes it entirely, I'm happy that I know. But then later on, when I'm pretty sure it was Ken that suggested I might be interested in the reading the book group. And so I came, and all of a sudden I realized I was talking with a total, all except Ken, as far as I could tell at the time, were mountaineers, guys who had spent their youth climbing mountains and were happy talking and reading about that and not a lot else. And to some degree that still goes on today with those of us who are left, and there are several folks here today who are part of that group, I'm happy to say. But I turned to Ken and largely to as a friend who might be interested in something else as well, and we fought a little bit of a rearguard action that way in the book group. But after the estuarium got started and I went on about my business, so to speak, every once in a while I'd get a telephone call from Ken. And at the beginning, I'd go, knowing Ken and the way he moved, I'd say to myself, "Oh, it's Ken. What does he want this time?" And it usually meant volunteering for something having to do with the estuarium. And I usually was able to say yes, which was great. But later on, I started getting calls from Ken, and I would say, "Oh, there's my friend Ken." And usually he still wanted something, but but I was much happier responding. And later on, still, it was, "There's my friend Ken who's checking up on me," and that was quite something.
Okay, I can do this. So I'm Michelle. Biologically, I am Diane and Ken's niece. And just wanted to say that, Ken did a lot of work with young people that he didn't know and impacted their lives, and also people that he did know. So, I came to live with Diane and Ken when I was 15 from a family that was impacted by drugs and alcohol. And you get kind of a couple people in your life that are your people. And Ken was definitely one of my people and has influenced me greatly. And I was thinking earlier when Charles was talking about community youth services, and I'm sure he wouldn't remember me or anything, but years and years ago, Ken and Diana got me to go and do my first internship when I was I'd gotten a GED, I was kind of floating around, didn't know what I wanted to do. I did an internship through community youth services at the Washington State History Museum. Took me several years, became a historian later on in my life, never thought I'd go to college. But Ken, just because he always did what he wanted to do with his life and he lived life on his own terms, has always just been really inspiring to me. So thanks.
I'm Michelle's husband and Ken's son-in-law, and my story is very, very quick here. I was thinking about Ken's prying questions and just thinking about the many car rides and little small trips went on with Diana and Ken. And there was always this moment when usually Michelle and I would be sitting in the back seat of the car. And don't worry, Ken wasn't driving when this would happen. But he would suddenly turn and there'd be this pause. And I knew it was like incoming. And that it would be the most insightful question, most unequivocal question possible. And while a little bit of dread sometimes, but I always knew it would be a meaningful conversation. And I am deeply grateful to have known Ken and to hopefully pass on that legacy of unequivocal questions and unequivocal thinking. But yeah, thank you, Ken.
Hi, I just want to introduce myself. Ken's daughter-in-law, and I have some really wonderful, special times that I remember spending time with Ken, and it was way back in the beginning when Payne and I first got married, in Key West, and then we moved to, our first duty station was Washington State, and my husband was on a ship, I just was like, I was by myself a lot, and Ken made a point of reaching out to me and developing a wonderful relationship with me, just wanting to catch up and like see how I was doing. And another time was when he came up to Marysville in Washington, and there were two times in particular. One was he developed I didn't realize I really loved cows. And he had a connection with some people that had cow and carnation farming, milk dairy farm somewhere in Marysville. And I just, from there on, I just was in love. You know? And another time was, I've never skied before I met him, so he introduced me to skiing. And I was really nervous the first time, and Diana were like, we'll like set you up with a private little training. So I was like, okay. So the first half hour, I had private lessons, and I think it was in Mount Rainier. And ever since then, it stuck with me, that muscle memory. And so now I really enjoy skiing. And whenever I have the opportunity to ski with my husband, we ski together. And he snowboards, but yeah, he leaves me on the dust. So it's okay. We meet up. We agree on a certain lane or whatever, or lift that we can get together every once in a while, every hour or whatever. Yeah. To check in, but yeah, and just since I travel so much and my husband's active duty, we live all over the world, and Ken always makes the time to call me and just every once in a while and just check in and just see how I'm doing, and I really appreciate that in my relationship that I had with him. And last time I saw him was this past year in October. I was going back home from Japan to visit my family, and I made a point of spending time with Diane and Ken, and we had a beer together, and we played Rummy Cube. We loved to play games, and that was one of the things I enjoy, spending time with my family, like my boys. Whenever we were together on all the trips, they would come and meet us wherever we were living, and we always played cards, hearts, spades, and all wonderful games. And my love for games of just, I never really played that many games with my family, but I introduced, Ken and Diana always introduced us some games, so you always have a special place in my heart. Thank you.
Well, it was mentioned that Ken was obsessed with skiing, and I'm one of his buddies that would do stuff with him. And you notice in the video he's skiing what appears to be really fast through the trees. But Ken also was into touring, and that's what Ken and I did. And he was good not only in downhill skiing, but also, if you imagine cross-country skiing, but telemark skiing. And we did a lot of trips in the North Cascades. And if you've been over Washington Pass, Highway 20, we skied off Silver Star, the big peaks you see when you go off. And we would, on that one, we went up with backpacks on skis, camped just below about 8,000 feet, and then went up to about the summits just below 9, and we'd ski that. And we also, Ken and Diana got me into sea kayaking. I'd done some whitewater, and we went out to Lure Beach and went around to Squally. And for me, it triggered a lifetime of sea kayaking in Alaska and down in Mexico and stuff. But the skiing, the best ski trips, we'd sometimes in this Memorial Day, we'd go down and ski off the top of Mount Shasta, skied off that. And but Ken would, even though he skied downhill, a lot of times he would telemark. And we were doing some of these backpack trips, like 5-day trips. I said, Ken, why don't you get some alpine touring skis? You're this great skier. And one thing about his skiing, by the way, is you notice how tight his skis were. I could ski anything Ken could, but I could not do that. I could ski parallel, and if you have a backpack and you're squatted down. But then even Ken would fall, and when you fall with a backpack, your head is driven into the snow. So Ken, why don't you get some alpine touring skis? You'd be less likely to do that, but it would still happen. And I think that then Ken and I were really into the desert, and Diana, we'd go down to Eastern Oregon, and it was like you'd start exploring it. We'd hike different hikes there. And one place near the Nevada border, southeast corner of Oregon, is called Steens Mountains, over 9,000 feet. So eventually Ken decided and I that we were going to ski up that in the winter, or early spring. So we went there, and the road was gated, so we hiked 7 miles up this road on the west side of the Steens. And the Steens are the edge of the Great Basin Desert, and that's a place where you have a whole bunch of mountain ranges because there is crust is pulling apart. So these big blocks drop down, and you'll have an easy side and a steep side. So we skied the easy side, got to a gate, and then we hiked 7 miles up a road to hit the snow line. But anyway, it was a 5-day trip, and we got to the summit, and there were like 25-knot winds, so we had cross-country skis. I telemark too, not like Ken, but we put rocks on them so we look around. We looked down on this place called Kiger Gorge because at one time there was a glacier there, and in the last ice age. And then we went back to camp, our high camp, which is, had some trees and stuff, it's sheltered. And then we decided to do another tour the next day. It was stormy, and we knew it was warming up. And so we were skiing ahead, and I was ahead of him, and there was like a bank about as tall as those doors. And I said, no way this will avalanche because it's not steep enough. But we came to a spot where about as high as those doors, well, more than that, but as high as the ceiling, and it went down. So I skied down that and triggered a big avalanche about 200 feet across. So, okay. And the bad news is I was so convinced it wouldn't avalanche, I had the beeper in my pack. So anyway, so Ken shows up. He's behind me. We can only see a couple hundred feet. And the avalanche stopped because it wasn't steep enough, long enough. So I said, well, Ken, take my picture and then help dig me out here. So we did that. But that wasn't so then our next big adventure, we decided to go to the Ruby Mountains, more desert stuff. And the Ruby Mountains are in northeastern Nevada, really remote. So we went there, and I called the avalanche on phone, no internet, in Salt Lake. So they said, well, they're upset. It hadn't snowed for weeks. We haven't had, oh, that's good, no snow. And we went later, so it was spring snow, which is much safer to ski on. So this was a 5-day trip. And so Ken and I had topographic maps, and Ken really wanted to go up this, I wanted to do a loop trip, Lamo Canyon, but there's this side canyon. Ken really wanted to go up it. So I said, well, okay. But I want to do this loop trip. But well, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So we go up this side canyon for about 3 or 4 Guza miles. And then there's this 11,000-foot peak and a rock ridge to another peak. But we got closer, and the topo map, you could almost think, well, maybe there's a gap there. Maybe there's a saddle. So we got up there, and it was like those doors. It was like a gate. So I was real happy, and Ken was happy. It's perfect snow, spring snow. So we go through this gate, and then it opens up this whole basin, the rest of the range. So on our right's an 11,000-foot peak. So we took the skis off, and we hiked up that, came back down, and we skied down this perfect, if you do ski, it's just this velvet snow, because it's spring snow. And then there's some lakes we visited, and then there's another peak, 11,000-foot peak, and we actually climbed out on skis. And we kind of split on the summit. We each had a different idea. We'll meet you in the summit. But then we looked down and we see a snowmobile. It's a wilderness area. And we thought, this is Nevada. So neither of us moved. I talked to him. We didn't want this guy to see us. So we made the summit. Then we skied down together, went back to camp, did some other tours. So also, then after that, we skied out. And right behind us, it kind of storm came and stuff. So we drove around to the east side of the range because we like hot springs. Like we used to go to this hot spring by the Steens Mountains. But this hot spring happened to be on private property. So it's a big valley, like this fault block range, it's down this valley. So we go to the neighbor. So, oh yeah, you can go to that hot spring. He won't care. So we go in, have all our clothes on, think, God, I hope this guy doesn't show up. But it's such a beautiful place. It's got 4 or 5 hot springs. One's a glory hole. Like if you've been to Yellowstone, you can look way down, there's kind of turquoise water. So we're soaking, and get dressed. Well, nothing happens. We get out. We drive on down. Ken wants a beer. There's this little tavern out in the desert here. So we go in. And I sit down. Ken's at the bar and get more beer. And he's talking about politics in Nevada. I think, well, for once, and I do like to talk, but I kept quiet. And all of a sudden, so they're having a great conversation about stuff. And then suddenly the bartender says, this guy comes through the door and he says, here comes trouble. So I look, and Ken looks, and this guy's coming in with his daughter, and the daughter looked a little stressed, so then Ken and I decide where we're going to go. But this guy looks at us and says, well, I've got this hot spring. You guys should come over and hop in it. And so we said, well, no, we got to get going. We didn't say we'd been there. So we start driving, and Ken tells me that little girl was being abused because that's his professional career. So this really was a bad guy, and there was nothing we could do. So that's the kind of trip we'd have, these great adventures, and Ken finally got the alpine touring skis, which made things easier for him. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your many memories of Ken. And so we close with gratitude for the life and love of Ken Guza. Though he has left this world, he leaves behind many stories, many adventures, and so much love. The loss of Ken has left a hole in many lives and hearts, and he is so missed. May we fill that hole with love, the fierce love that Ken had for family and friends, and for this beautiful earth, and for life itself. Our closing words are words that Ken chose from the writings of neurologist Oliver Sacks. My predominant feeling is of gratitude. I have loved and been loved. I have been given much and have given something in return. Above all, I have been a sentient being, a thinking animal on this beautiful planet, and that in itself has been an enormous privilege and adventure. May we know that we cannot extinguish the light of love that Ken brought into this world, And may we see that light reflected in all that we do, knowing that his light shines on through us too. Diana asked me to pass on the thanks of her and her family. Thank you for joining today to celebrate Ken's life. And Diana has 2 requests. First, please know that Diana promised Ken that she would be okay. And as she finds her way forward without him, she wants you to know that she is doing okay. Diana would appreciate it if you don't tell her how sorry you are for her loss. She knows that you are, and those words take her back to the heartbreak of loss. And second, Diana would like to receive your remembrances of Ken. For those online, we've had the chat open and we'll leave it open for a little longer in case you'd like to share a memory. And for those on site, you're invited to gather in the commons for refreshments and conversations and more stories. There are cards where you can write the stories about Ken and his impact on your life. Thank you all for being here today in whatever way you have arrived. May we go in peace.